Hey everyone, today I'm going to be going over my Illidan solo tank kill. First I gotta thank my guild South on Grobulus. Thank you guys for letting me do this. Now let's look at some gear, buffs, talents, and I'll talk about like general strategy we had for this as well. Then I'm gonna commentate over the actual kill. So with this set, we're trying to accomplish a lot. We need to be sheer capped. We need enough HP to survive. We need enough spell power that we can actually hold threat. We need to be crit capped. And we also need a lot of fire res on top of all that. So we have a lot going on here. This is like a pretty specific set. So you can see here at 304 fire res, there are some options you have in the middle of the fight to actually get more fire res. I'll talk about those in a little bit as well. As far as like the defensive stats, I had almost 55% hard avoidance for this, so that was actually pretty good given the set. 22.3k armor, pretty solid. Exactly defense cap. I was 0.78 over sheer cap. As far as spell damage, 595 buffed. That is with the Flask of Blinding Light, which I didn't have on the entire fight. We'll talk about that too later. As far as spell hit, 4.35%, almost the minimum you can get. HP, 17.6k. This is with Commanding Shout, so my HP I didn't think was really sufficient without Commanding Shout, so we ended up doing the Commanding Shout for this, and it saved me during the fire alleys, so it was definitely worth it. As far as the gear, it's like mostly the badge fire res gear with fire res enchants. And then we have lots of BT pieces in here. Obviously, Faceplate of the Impenetrable is super good for this. Shadow Moon insignia is really strong as well. The use effect on this is extremely important because it's going to have really high uptime during the 2 LE part of the fight, which is like the most dangerous part. And then also during Illidan's Enrage phase, it'll be up the entire Enrage. So this is a super, super important trinket for this. Plus the passives are incredibly good for this as well. So let's take a look at the talents. So I went to special build for this. So it's basically my normal 0, 40, 21 build, except I took 3 points out of Reckoning. I put 1 more point in Anticipation than I normally would. Also got Spell Warding. Obviously the most dangerous part of this fight is all spell damage, so this was a really important talent to have. For buffs, I had pretty standard buffs. I went with the Grace of Air totem for this. That really helped me hit that sheer cap. The flask. So I started the fight with the Flask of Blinding Light. My plan was to switch to a Flask of Chromatic Wonder and a Fel Barrier for phase 2. I got distracted. I forgot to do this. On the other attempts I had been doing this, and with that combo that put me up to FR cap, the damage was pretty low with FR cap, and we were only doing 1 Bloodlust for phase 2 in our initial attempts at this. But we actually looked at the damage and we realized we could just use all our lust there because we actually had enough damage without lust to at least soft skip demon phase, but potentially hard skip it as well. If you're not familiar with those terms, soft skipping demon phase is when like Illidan does his RP to turn into a demon, and then he immediately transforms back into a night elf and then stuns everybody, goes into phase 5. The hard skip for demon phase is when he doesn't even do that demon RP at all. The biggest difference here is if he does do the soft skip, he's going to do a threat reset. If he does the hard skip, then there's no threat reset. No threat reset was pretty important because my threat was pretty bad in this gear. So we ended up doing all of our bloodlusts in phase 2 since that was the most dangerous part of the fight, and we would be able to skip demon phase anyway. So given that all our healers were going to have bloodlust, I felt pretty good that I could like drop some fire res since I was going to be getting lusted heals from all of our healers. I ultimately decided I was going to just go full fire res because I didn't have many attempts at this, and I wanted to, just play it safe, make sure we got this done. But then I got distracted. I completely forgot to put on my Fel Barrier and my Flask of Chromatic Wonder. Luckily, I was right, and the lusted heals were actually enough to make up for the fire res difference. Threat was like a huge problem in this fight, so having that extra spell power from my Aegis plus Flask of Blinding Light ended up being super huge. I may have lucked out. Obviously, the damage in phase 2 is super RNG with what you resist, what percent you resist. So it may not necessarily work every time. If I were to do this again, I would do the Fel Barrier swap, but I would leave on the Flask of Blinding Light just for that extra threat, because I think fully lusted healers with what would have been, I think, 332 fire res if I did the Fel Barrier swap, I think that would be totally sufficient. But in this kill, I was actually 304 fire res by mistake for that phase, but it worked out, so that was handy. All right, so now let's take a look at the clip. So start the fight here. I actually didn't have my Iron Shield pot up to start the fight. Make sure you have that before the fight actually starts. I popped Oil of Immolation here for a little bit of extra threat. I'm also spamming Blessing of Salve on our Shamans for some threat when I have open GCDs. But unfortunately, one of our hunters pulled here. I think his Feign got resisted. Luckily, he moved out of the raid. That was really good. So I was melee threat. Nobody else was melee threat in the range stack. But that one was kind of my bad because I should have salved the hunters. I just forgot to. So obviously with this set, my threat is way lower. So I should have had salve on the hunters. That's my bad. I end up fixing that in a sec. But also the pets were still getting hit by Flame Crash here. So I had to do a little bigger move. They were kind of in a bad spot over here. So here we're gonna get the phase 2 transition, and we had our hunters assigned to misdirect the non-kill target to me, then the kill target to me, and then the non-kill target again with the third MD. Here I'm salving the hunters. This is where I got distracted and forgot to pop my Flask of Chromatic Wonder and my Fel Barrier on. But here we drop a Consecration over on the first one. We Holy Wrath in the middle so it hits both, then Exo. Popping Wings here too, making sure we have Crazy Threat. And where I'm tanking these guys right now, right there also I pop Nightmare Seed and SMI. So I'm going to have both of those up pretty much the entire time both of these Ellies are alive. So that's a nice little buffer to have. Where I'm tanking them is pretty much the furthest you can take them. You can take the far one maybe like 1 more yard, maybe 2 more yards past where I had them, but you don't have a ton of room. So what I did, I stood and fired quite a bit to like minimize how much space I was taking up with these flame patches to give the raid a little bit of room. And here, unfortunately, we got both blue beams on my side here. And I did a really dumb move here. This is terrible. Don't do that. I don't know how that flame breath didn't hit the whole raid and kill us all, but somehow it didn't and it worked out. Obviously there, I should have moved along the outside, not the inside, or just straight through him, straight through the middle to flip him. But the blue beam was kind of coming through my raid frames and I couldn't really see it, so I kind of panicked there. Don't do what I did there. So here we got phase 3. We're just trying to get all our threat back here. My threat was actually pretty strong here. Getting those salves, just getting our normal rotation in. And you can see we've got like all the debuffs up too. Super important. Scorpion Sting actually falls off. That's not great. Obviously, you want that up the entire time, especially when you're tanking this fire resistance gear. So Here I also lose Grace of Air for a sec, but I called for a new one. The pets here are also getting hit by this flame crash still. I needed to be better about moving here to make sure they weren't getting hit by that. I was not paying as much attention to that as I should have been. So here we barely beat the demon phase for the hard skip. So that was pretty handy because I didn't lose my threat, and that's pretty great when I'm wearing a set that generates pretty bad threat. So since I had a pretty big threat lead here, I decided to switch to Flask of Fortification just to have an extra buffer for the final phase. Obviously, that's when he enrages, and that's the next most dangerous part of the fight after you make it through the 2 Ellie part of the fight. So here we get wings back, pop that. Threat is totally good. We got the Flask of Fort up now. And our Nightmare Seed and our SMI are coming off cooldown here at the perfect time, right before he's gonna enrage. We also marked Maev so that we could see her a little more easily for when she drops her trap. And then here, she's about to blink here, so she blinks. I look behind me. I see that she's dropping it way back there, way out of range of my healers. We'd have to do a huge move just to get over there, and I'd probably die because I'd be outranging all my healers. So I ended up just staying here. I had SMI and my Nightmare Seed up, so I just pop that and tank it normally. Healers are able to keep me up, luckily. Unfortunately, our Moonkin was kind of in the way of my move out of Flame Crash there, so he did die there. But it was a worthwhile sacrifice, I guess. But yeah, that was the whole fight right there. I think we did like 5 or 6 total attempts to get this down. Like the early attempts were mostly figuring out like the positioning of the fire alleys, and then the attempts after that were mostly like having the raid like figure out their positioning so they weren't taking too much damage and not dying to blue beam. So it really didn't take too many tries, but this strat, I don't think this is a good every week strat. It was like a fun achievement to do once, but the amount of risk you add going from 3 tanks to 2 tanks is very minor, but the amount of risk you add going 2 tanks to 1 tank is quite a bit. So I think for an efficient every week kill, it's best to just do the 2 tank strat, in my opinion. That's what we're going to be probably doing going forward. We may do this again at some point, but I think 2 tanking is probably the best way to do this for just consistent kills. So yeah, that's the whole fight right there. And let me know how you guys like this style of video. I really like doing these breakdowns, but let me know what you guys think. And thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.